The crystal walls of the tribunal chamber sparkled with cold light as Commander Lisa Martinez stood before the most powerful beings in the galaxy. Her hands were cuffed behind her back, with energy restraints that glowed blue against her dark uniform. The massive room stretched high above her head, filled with alien delegates who looked down at her like judges deciding the fate of a criminal. Lisa kept her chin up and her back straight. She had fought in 3 major battles against the Kethvar invasion fleet. She had saved thousands of lives, both human and alien. Yet here she stood, accused of being a savage and a barbarian. The Galactic Council had called this trial to decide humanity's future in the Alliance. The aliens wanted to know if humans could be trusted to fight alongside civilized species, or if they were too violent and unpredictable to remain as members. Admiral Jake Morrison sat at the prosecutor's table, wearing his formal blue uniform with gold trim. His face looked tired and sad. Jake had been Lisa's teacher at the military academy 15 years ago. He had taught her everything about space combat and leadership. Now he was forced to read the charges against her, and against all of humanity. Jake stood up slowly and opened a data pad. His voice echoed in the vast chamber as he began to speak. Commander Lisa Martinez, you stand accused of violating the Galactic Military Code during the Battle of Kepler Station. The charges include excessive use of force, refusal to follow established combat protocols, and the deployment of banned kinetic weapons against enemy vessels. Lisa felt anger rising in her chest, but she kept her face calm. The Battle of Kepler Station had been a desperate fight. The Kethvar had attacked without warning, targeting civilian ships and space stations. The human fleet had been outnumbered 3-1. Furthermore, Jake continued, his voice growing quieter, human ground forces are accused of using guerrilla tactics, improvised explosive devices, and refusing to accept enemy surrender when tactically disadvantageous. The alien delegates murmured among themselves. Their voices sounded like wind chimes and grinding metal, depending on their species. Most of them wore elaborate armor or biosuits that made them look more like machines than living beings. At the center of the raised platform sat the council speaker, a creature called Zethmer from the Vortex species. His body was covered in living crystal that shifted colors from deep blue to bright silver. The crystal armor made him look like a walking statue, beautiful and terrible at the same time. Zethmer raised one crystal in hand, and the chamber fell silent. When he spoke, his voice came from speakers built into his armor, making it sound hollow and mechanical. The evidence is clear. Humanity has shown itself to be a species of barbarians who know nothing of civilized warfare, while the galaxy has evolved beyond primitive violence. Humans continue to fight like wild animals. Lisa felt her jaw clench. She thought about the human soldiers who had died at Kepler Station. Danny Peterson, who had blown himself up with a makeshift bomb to stop Kethvar troops from reaching a school full of alien children. Rachel Stone, who had flown her damaged fighter into an enemy cruiser rather than let it escape to attack more civilians. Kevin Blake, who had carried wounded Helixian refugees to safety while enemy fire rained down around him. Our military protocols exist for a reason, Zethmer continued. They prevent unnecessary casualties and ensure that warfare remains a tool of policy, not an expression of bloodlust. Humanity has ignored these protocols and fought with the savage instincts of their primitive ancestors. The other delegates nodded in agreement. The Helixian representative, encased in a biosuit that looked like liquid metal, spoke in a high, singing voice. The humans used close-range combat instead of proper long-distance energy exchanges. They boarded enemy ships instead of accepting honorable surrender. They targeted military installations without regard for the rules of engagement that have kept the galaxy civilized for thousands of years. Lisa couldn't stay quiet anymore. She stepped forward, her energy restraints glowing brighter as they detected her movement. With respect, Council Speaker, those rules of engagement would have gotten everyone killed. The Kethver weren't following your protocols. They were murdering civilians while you expected us to fight by ancient rules that gave them every advantage. Zethmer's crystal armor flashed angry red. Silence. You speak of things you do not understand. Your species has been part of the Alliance for less than 50 years. We have maintained peace and order in this galaxy for millennia. Peace and order? Lisa's voice grew louder. Tell that to the families of the 2 million beings who died at Kepler Station before we arrived. Tell that to the children who watched their parents get slaughtered while the Alliance fleet maneuvered according to your precious protocols. The chamber erupted in angry voices. Some delegates demanded Lisa be removed from the trial. Others called for immediate expulsion of humanity from the Alliance. Through it all, Jake Morrison sat quietly, his hands folded on the table, watching Lisa with sad eyes. Zethmer stood up, his crystal armor making him look like a giant made of living diamond. Enough! The evidence speaks for itself. Humanity is too violent, too unpredictable, too primitive to fight alongside civilized species. You won your battle through savage brutality, not through skill or honor. We won because we cared more about saving lives than following rules, Lisa shot back. We won because we were willing to do whatever it took to protect innocent people. You won because you fight like animals, Zethmer said, his voice cold and final. You have no concept of honor, no understanding of proper warfare, no respect for the traditions that have kept this galaxy stable for thousands of years. You are nothing but primitives with advanced weapons. Lisa felt her heart pounding. She looked around the chamber at all the alien faces staring down at her with disgust and contempt. These beings who had never faced real danger, who had never had to choose between following rules and saving lives, who had never known what it meant to fight for survival. Don't humiliate me, she said, her voice steady, but her hands shaking with anger. That's when Jake Morrison finally moved. He had been sitting quietly through the entire trial, reading charges he didn't believe, prosecuting a case he didn't support. But something in Lisa's voice, something in the way the aliens looked at her like she was an animal in a cage, made him remember why he had become a soldier in the first place. Jake stood up slowly, his chair scraping against the crystal floor. Every eye in the chamber turned to him. The prosecutor was supposed to remain silent except when presenting evidence. Speaking out of turn was a violation of council protocol, but Jake had spent 40 years in the military, and he had learned that sometimes the most important battles were fought not with weapons, but with words. Sometimes you had to break the rules to defend what was right. He looked directly at Zethmer, his brown eyes meeting the alien's glowing crystal face. When he spoke, his voice was quiet, but it carried clearly through the vast chamber. Take off the armor, Jake said, and say it again, looking me in the eye. The chamber fell completely silent. Lisa stared at Jake in shock. The alien delegates seemed frozen, unsure of what was happening. Even Zethmer's crystal armor stopped shifting colors, as if the creature inside was too surprised to react. Jake took a step forward, his hands at his sides, his uniform suddenly looking very plain and simple compared to all the elaborate armor and biosuits surrounding him. You want to call us primitives? You want to say we don't understand honor or civilization? Fine, but do it as yourself, not hiding behind that armor. Do it looking me in the eye, being to being, without any enhancements or amplifiers or crystal shells. The silence stretched on, heavy and electric. Lisa realized that Jake had just done something that would either save humanity's place in the Alliance or destroy it completely. There was no middle ground now. Zethmer's armor began to glow brighter, and Lisa could see the alien's rage building like a storm about to break. The silence in the tribunal chamber stretched like a wire about to snap. Jake Morrison stood perfectly still, his challenge hanging in the air between him and the towering crystal figure of Zethmor. Every alien delegate stared at the human admiral, who had just broken every rule of council proceedings. Lisa Martinez felt her heart racing as she watched. Jake faced down the most powerful being in the known galaxy. She had never seen her old mentor look so calm and so dangerous at the same time. His uniform was plain blue fabric compared to the glittering armor and biosuits around him, but somehow he seemed to fill the entire room with his presence. Zethmor's crystal armor shifted through angry colors, from deep red to blazing orange. The living crystal responded to his emotions, making him look like a walking fire. When he finally spoke, his voice boomed through the chamber's speakers with barely controlled rage. You dare make demands of a council speaker? You forget your place, human. I am protected by sacred law and ancient tradition. No one may ask me to remove the symbols of my office. Jake took another step forward, his hands still at his sides. I'm not asking you to remove symbols. I'm asking you to remove a shield. You want to judge us for how we fight? Fine, but do it without hiding behind technology. The other delegates began muttering among themselves in dozens of different languages. The sound filled the chamber like angry insects buzzing. Some called for Jake to be arrested for contempt. Others seemed curious about what would happen next. The Helixian representative, enclosed in his liquid metal biosuit, spoke in his high singing voice. This is madness. The human prosecutor has lost his mind. Remove him from these proceedings at once. But Jake ignored the calls for his removal. He kept his eyes fixed on Zethmor's glowing crystal face. Every species here wears armor or uses enhancers. Every one of you hides behind technology when you fight. You call us primitive, but when was the last time any of you faced combat with just your natural abilities? Lisa suddenly understood what Jake was doing. She had wondered why human tactics seemed so shocking to the aliens. Now she realized that galactic warfare had become completely dependent on advanced equipment. The aliens had forgotten what it meant to fight with courage and skill instead of superior technology. A delegate from the Drakmari Empire stood up on massive legs. His powered exoskeleton made him 3 times larger than his natural size, with mechanical arms that could crush steel. When he spoke, his voice came through speakers that made it sound like thunder. Our armor and enhancements are the result of millions of years of evolution and advancement. We have moved beyond the crude physical limitations of primitive biology. Why should we handicap ourselves to match your weakness? Jake smiled for the first time since the trial began. It was not a happy smile. Because your strength isn't really yours. Take away the exoskeleton, and what are you? Take away the biosuit, and what can you do? Take away the crystal armor, and what remains? He gestured toward the assembled delegates. Every one of you depends on artificial enhancement. Your reflexes come from computers. Your strength comes from machines. Your courage comes from knowing. You're protected by shields and armor that make you nearly invincible. The buzzing of alien voices grew louder. Some delegates seemed angry, but others looked uncomfortable. Jake's words were hitting something they didn't want to examine. Humans fight differently because we have to, Jake continued. We don't have crystal armor that projects energy shields. We don't have biosuits that enhance our reflexes or exoskeletons that multiply our strength. When we go into battle, it's just us. Our minds, our training, our determination, and our willingness to die for something more important than ourselves. Zethmor's armor flashed brighter. You speak of weakness as if it were strength. You celebrate your limitations as if they were virtues. This is exactly the primitive thinking that makes your species unfit for civilized warfare. Then prove me wrong, Jake said quietly. Take off the armor, and tell me we're primitive. Look me in the eye without any enhancement and explain why following ancient protocols is more important than saving lives. Lisa watched the alien delegates shifting nervously in their seats. Jake's challenge was spreading through the chamber like ripples in a pond. She could see doubt in their movements, uncertainty in their postures. A Vorthic delegate sitting next to Zethmer leaned over and whispered something in their musical language. Other species were having quiet conversations in their own tongues. The chamber filled with the sound of whispered arguments and nervous energy. A young delegate from the Calarian Federation stood up. Her biosuit was simpler than most, designed more for protection than enhancement. When she spoke, her voice was thoughtful rather than angry. Speaker Zethmer, perhaps we should consider the humans' request. If their primitive methods are truly inferior, what harm could there be in demonstrating our natural superiority? Several other delegates nodded in agreement. Lisa could see that Jake's challenge was dividing the council. Some aliens were curious about what would happen if they removed their enhancements, while others were clearly afraid of the idea. Zethmer turned toward the Calarian delegate, his crystal armor blazing with anger. You would have me disgrace myself by appearing before this assembly in my natural form? You would have me reduce myself to the level of these primitive humans. I would have you prove that our superiority is real, not just technological, the Calarian replied. If we are truly more advanced, more evolved, more civilized, then we should be able to demonstrate it without artificial aid. Jake nodded toward a young alien delegate. She understands. Real strength doesn't come from equipment. Real courage doesn't need armor. Real civilization isn't about following rules. It's about doing what's right even when it's difficult. The Drakmari delegate in his massive exoskeleton laughed, a sound like grinding metal. Foolish words from a foolish species. Without our enhancements, we would be reduced to the level of animals fighting with tooth and claw. Exactly, Jake said. And that's when you find out who you really are. When everything is stripped away, except your will to fight, your determination to protect what matters, your courage to stand up, even when you might fall down. That's what makes the difference between a warrior and someone wearing warrior's equipment. Lisa felt pride swelling in her chest as she watched her old teacher face down the entire Galactic Council. Jake was showing them something they had forgotten. In their thousands of years of technological advancement, he was showing them what it meant to be truly alive, truly present, truly committed to something beyond yourself. Zethmer's crystal armor was cycling through colors rapidly now, reflecting his internal struggle. Lisa could see that he was caught between his anger at Jake's disrespect and his uncertainty about whether the challenge might reveal something he didn't want to know about himself. The chamber fell quiet again, as everyone waited to see what the council speaker would do. The moment stretched on, heavy with possibility and danger. Lisa knew that Jake had just changed everything, but she didn't know if it would save humanity or destroy them. Finally, Zethmer spoke, his voice carrying a note Lisa had never heard before from an alien delegate. It sounded almost like uncertainty. And if I accept this challenge? If I remove my armor and face you as you demand? What then, human? What do you hope to accomplish with this display? Jake's smile became genuine for the first time. Then we find out what's really underneath all that crystal. We find out if you're as superior as you claim, or if maybe, just maybe, we're not so different after all. The crystal chamber held its breath as Zethmer stood motionless, his armor cycling through colors like a living rainbow. Lisa Martinez watched from her position near the defendants' table, hardly daring to breathe. Jake Morrison had done something no one had ever attempted in the history of the Galactic Council. He had challenged the very foundation of how the galaxy's most powerful beings saw themselves. The silence was broken by an unexpected voice. The young Calarian delegate, who had supported Jake's challenge earlier, stood up again. Her biosuit was sleek and silver, covering her from head to toe like a second skin. "I will go first," she said, her voice clear and steady. "If we are to judge humanity fairly, we should understand what it means to stand without enhancement." A wave of shocked murmurs swept through the chamber. Several delegates called out in protest, but the Kalarian ignored them. She reached up to her helmet and began disconnecting the seals that held her biosuit together. "Delegate Kira, this is highly irregular," Zethmer said, his crystal armor flashing orange with alarm. "There is no precedent for such actions in council proceedings. Then we make new precedent," Kira replied. Her helmet came off with a soft hiss, revealing a face that looked surprisingly human-like. Her skin was pale blue, and her eyes were larger than a human's, but she had the same basic features. Without the biosuit's voice modulator, her words sounded softer and more natural. Jake nodded respectfully toward her. "Thank you, Delegate Kira. That took courage." Kira continued removing pieces of her biosuit. As each section came off, she seemed to become smaller and more vulnerable. The artificial muscles and enhanced joints were replaced by thin limbs that shook slightly in the chamber's cool air. When she was finished, she stood in a simple gray undergarment, looking fragile and exposed. "This is what I really am," she said, her voice barely audible without the suit's amplifiers. "Without the bio-enhancement, I'm slow and weak and easily hurt. My natural reflexes are poor, my strength is limited, and my endurance is terrible compared to what the suit provides." Lisa felt a shock of recognition. Without her biosuit, Kira looked vulnerable in exactly the same way humans were vulnerable. The advanced alien technology had been hiding the fact that underneath all their enhancements, the so-called superior species were just as fragile as anyone else. The effect on the other delegates was immediate and dramatic. The Drakmari representative in his massive exoskeleton shifted uncomfortably in his mechanical frame. The Halixian delegate's liquid metal biosuit seemed to ripple with nervous energy. Even Zethmer's crystal armor had stopped cycling through colors and settled on a deep blue that Lisa was beginning to recognize as uncertainty. "This proves nothing," the Drakmari delegate said, his voice booming through his suit's speakers. "We developed our enhancements to overcome the limitations of biology. Why should we voluntarily return to a primitive state?" "Because," Jake said, walking closer to the delegate's towering mechanical form, "you can't judge what you don't understand. You've been calling us primitive for fighting without enhancements, but you've forgotten what that actually means." An older delegate from the Vorthic species, sitting in the second row, stood up slowly. His crystal armor was darker and more complex than Zethmer's, marking him as a senior member of their society. "I remember," he said, his voice carrying a weight of years. "Before the crystal bonding, before the armor became part of us, we fought with weapons grown from our own bodies. We shaped crystal with our minds and our will, not with machines." He began the complex process of separating from his living crystal armor. It was different from removing a biosuit or exoskeleton. The crystal seemed to be part of him, growing from his skin like a second skeleton. As it peeled away, it revealed a being that looked like a cross between a human and a living jewel. His natural skin had a crystalline quality, but he was clearly organic, clearly alive in a way the armor had hidden. "I had forgotten how it felt to be just myself," he said, his natural voice much softer than the armor's speakers. "To think with my own mind instead of the armor's processors. To feel with my own senses instead of enhanced inputs." One by one, other delegates began to follow suit. The process was slow and awkward. Many of them hadn't been outside their enhancements for years, some for decades. The Halixian delegate's biosuit came off in sections, revealing a being that looked like a cross between a human and a bird. with hollow bones and delicate features that explained why he needed artificial strength and endurance. A delegate from the Zephyrian Collective removed her environmental suit to reveal a being adapted for a high-gravity world, short and powerfully built, but surprisingly similar to humans in her basic structure. Without her suit's artificial grace and enhanced mobility, she moved with the careful deliberation of someone carrying heavy-weight dot as more aliens revealed their natural forms. Lisa began to see a pattern. Underneath all their technological enhancement, they were individuals just like humans. They had fears and hopes and physical limitations. They were trying to survive and protect their people, just like everyone else. Jake had positioned himself in the center of the chamber, still wearing his simple uniform. Compared to the aliens in their various states of undress, he looked remarkably normal and unremarkable. But that was exactly his point. "This is what humans bring to the Alliance," he said, his voice carrying clearly through the chamber without any artificial amplification. "We fight as ourselves. When a human soldier goes into battle, what you see is what you get. Our strength is our natural strength. Our reflexes are our natural reflexes. Our courage is our natural courage." Lisa took advantage of the moment to speak up. "At the Battle of Kepler Station, we didn't have time to put on fancy armor or connect to enhancement systems. The Kethver were killing civilians while the Alliance fleet was still powering up their energy shields and calibrating their targeting systems." She gestured toward the partially undressed delegates. "Look around this room. How long did it take each of you to remove your enhancements? How vulnerable were you during that process? Now imagine you're under enemy fire and your equipment malfunctions. What happens then?" The implications of her words hit the delegates like a physical blow. They began to understand that their dependence on technology was also a weakness. If their enhancements failed or were disabled, they would be helpless in a way that humans never were. Zethmer had been watching the transformation of his council with growing alarm. His crystal armor was the most advanced in the chamber, integrated with his body in ways that made removal dangerous and difficult. He represented the pinnacle of technological enhancement, and Jake's challenge threatened everything he believed about himself and his species. "This is meaningless," he said, his voice harsh through the armor speakers. "We are not the same as humans. We have evolved beyond the need for primitive struggle. Our technology is our evolution." Jake looked up at the towering crystal figure. "Then you should have no trouble proving it. If you're truly superior, if your armor makes you better rather than just different, then removing it temporarily shouldn't threaten you." The chamber fell silent again. All eyes turned to Zethmer, waiting to see if the council speaker would accept the challenge or retreat. Behind protocol and procedure, Lisa watched the interplay between the two leaders and realized that the fate of humanity and the Alliance hung on this single moment. If Zethmer removed his armor, everything would change. If he refused, the trial would continue along its original path toward humanity's expulsion. The crystal armor began to shift and change, its colors flowing like liquid light. Lisa held her breath, knowing that the next few minutes would determine the future of human-alien relations for generations to come. The crystal chamber felt different now. Half the alien delegates sat exposed in their natural forms, looking smaller and more fragile than they had moments before. The other half remained in their armor and biosuits, but even they seemed less imposing surrounded by their unenhanced colleagues. Zethmar stood alone at the speaker's platform, his crystal armor blazing with conflicted colors. Lisa Martinez could see him struggling with Jake Morrison's challenge. As council speaker, he represented the pinnacle of Vorthic society and galactic civilization. To remove his armor would be to admit that everything he stood for might be wrong. Jake waited patiently in the center of the chamber. He had not moved from his position, standing calmly in his simple uniform while chaos erupted around him. His strategy was working better than Lisa had dared to hope. The aliens were beginning to question their own superiority. The elderly, Vorthic delegate who had been first to remove his crystal armor spoke up. His natural voice was weak compared to the armor's amplifiers, but his words carried weight. Speaker Zethmer, I have served on this council for 200 years. I have seen us grow more dependent on our enhancements with each passing decade. Perhaps it is time to remember who we were before the crystal became our identity. Zethmer, this armor flashed angry red. Elder Koth, you speak of abandoning the greatest achievement of our species. The crystal armor is not just protection, it is evolution. It makes us more than we could ever be naturally. Does it? Asked Delegate Kira from her position near the front of the chamber. Without her biosuit, she looked young and vulnerable, but her voice carried new strength. Or does it make us forget what we were capable of without it? Jake seized the moment. May I show the council something? He asked, pulling out a small datapad. With your permission, I would like to present evidence that was not part of the original trial. Zethmer wanted to refuse, but the other delegates were already murmuring their approval. Too many of them were curious about what Jake had to show. The speaker's authority was slipping away with each passing minute. Proceed, Zethmer said reluctantly. Jake activated the datapad, and holographic images filled the air above the chamber floor. The first image showed a human soldier named Danny Peterson crawling through the wreckage of Kepler Station. His uniform was torn and bloody, and he was carrying a wounded Halixian child in his arms. This is Sergeant Peterson during the Battle of Kepler Station, Jake explained. He volunteered for a rescue mission into the most dangerous part of the station. No armor, no enhancements, just basic equipment and his determination to save lives. The next image showed Peterson setting up an improvised explosive device while enemy forces closed in around him. The Halixian child was safely behind cover, along with several other alien civilians. Peterson knew he wouldn't survive the explosion, but he also knew it was the only way to stop the Kethfor from reaching the civilians. He made the choice to sacrifice himself, not because a computer told him to, not because his armor calculated the odds, but because he decided it was the right thing to do. Lisa watched the alien delegates staring at the images. Many of them had never seen unenhanced combat before. They were used to warfare, where soldiers were protected by multiple layers of shields and armor, where computers made tactical decisions, where death was rare, and usually the result of equipment failure rather than personal choice. The next series of images showed pilot Rachel Stone flying her damaged fighter through an asteroid field. Her navigation systems were dead, her shields were down, and her engines were failing. But she was still flying, using only her natural reflexes and training to avoid the spinning rocks. Lieutenant Stone's mission was to deliver critical intelligence about Kethvar positions, Jake continued. Her ship was hit by enemy fire early in the battle. Any sensible pilot would have ejected and waited for rescue. Instead, she flew for 6 hours through enemy territory, manually piloting a ship that should have been impossible to control. The images showed Stone's hands on the control stick, her face tight with concentration as she threaded her fighter. Between massive asteroids, there were no computers helping her, no artificial intelligence calculating trajectories. Just a human pilot and her determination to complete the mission. She could have given up at any time, Jake said. Her ship was dying around her. She was injured and exhausted, and the odds of success were almost zero. But she kept flying because people were counting on her. The final set of images showed Sergeant Kevin Blake leading a mixed group of human and alien soldiers through the ruins of a space station. They were carrying wounded civilians, some human and some from various alien species. Blake himself was bleeding from a head wound, but he was still helping an injured Drakmari engineer walk to safety. Sergeant Blake's unit was cut off during the evacuation of Sector 7, Jake explained. Instead of retreating to safe positions, they chose to go deeper into enemy territory to rescue trapped civilians. They spent 18 hours fighting their way through Kethvo forces, carrying wounded and protecting refugees. Lisa felt tears in her eyes as she watched the images. She had read the reports, but seeing the actual footage made the sacrifices more real. These soldiers had fought and died, not for glory or honor, but for the simple principle that innocent lives mattered more than their own safety. The chamber was completely silent now. Even the delegates who still wore their armor seemed transfixed by what they were seeing. This was warfare as they had never imagined it. Personal and immediate and terrifyingly real. Jake turned off the datapad and looked around the chamber. You want to know why humans fight the way we do? This is why. Because when everything goes wrong, when all the technology fails, when all the plans fall apart, there's still one thing left. The choice to keep fighting or give up. The choice to help others or save yourself. The choice to do what's right even when it's hard. Delegate Kira spoke first, her voice barely above a whisper. In our biosuits, we feel invincible. We think the technology makes us brave. But what these humans did, they did knowing they could die at any moment. The elderly Vorthic delegate nodded slowly. We have forgotten what courage actually means. We thought advancement meant removing risk, eliminating danger, making everything safe and predictable. But these images show us something different. What do they show? Jake asked gently. They show that being truly alive means being willing to risk everything for something more important than yourself. Elder Koth replied, Our ancestors understood this. Before the crystal armor, Vorthic warriors would grow weapons from their own bodies, literally giving up pieces of themselves to protect others. We called it crystal sacrifice, and it was the highest honor our people could achieve. A Drakmari delegate, still wearing his exoskeleton, spoke up. Our poets used to sing of the naked blade, the moment when a warrior faced death with nothing but courage and skill. We thought those were primitive stories, legends from our barbaric past. Maybe they were legends about our better selves, suggested another delegate. Jake nodded. Every species in this chamber has stories about heroes who fought against impossible odds with nothing but determination and hope. You've been calling those stories primitive, but maybe they're actually about the most advanced thing any of us can be. Zethmer's crystal armor had been growing dimmer throughout Jake's presentation. Now it was barely glowing at all, just a faint blue radiance that made him look almost ghostly. You're asking us to give up everything that makes us superior. He sighed, but his voice lacked its earlier conviction. No, Jake replied. I'm asking you to remember everything that made you great before you became superior. The silence that followed was different from the angry tension that had filled the chamber. Earlier, this was the silence of beings confronting truths they had been avoiding for far too long. The tribunal chamber remained silent for long moments after Jake Morrison finished his presentation. Lisa Martinez watched Zethmer standing alone on his platform, his crystal armor now barely glowing. The council speaker looked isolated and uncertain for the first time since the trial began. Finally, the silence was broken by an unexpected sound. Elder Koth, the old Vorthic delegate who had removed his crystal armor, began to laugh. It was a soft, sad sound that echoed strangely in the vast chamber. Do you know what we used to call ourselves before the crystal bonding? He asked, looking up at Zethmer. We called ourselves the Heart Shapers. We believed that courage came from the heart, not from armor. We thought that the strongest crystal was the one grown from pure emotion, not from machines. Zethmer's armor flickered with confused colors. Elder Koth, those are old stories, legends from our primitive past. Are they? Elder Koth stood up slowly, his natural crystal skin catching the chamber's light. Or are they reminders of who we really are underneath all this technology? Jake stepped forward again. The trial was supposed to determine if humans are fit to remain in the Alliance. But maybe the real question is whether the Alliance is still fit to protect the galaxy. His words sent a shock through the chamber. Several delegates gasped or made sounds of protest. But Jake continued before anyone could interrupt him. The Kethver invasion succeeded because they knew exactly how you would respond. They studied your protocols, your rules of engagement, your predictable tactics. They counted on you following ancient procedures while they slaughtered civilians. Lisa found her voice. The intelligence reports we captured show that the Kethvar expected the Alliance fleet to maintain proper formation and exchange long-range fire for several days before closing to combat range. They planned to use that time to evacuate their valuable forces while leaving expendable troops to tie up your ships. Jake nodded. They never expected humans to break formation and charge straight into close combat. They never expected boarding, actions or kinetic weapons, or soldiers willing to sacrifice themselves to save alien civilians. Our barbaric tactics weren't primitive, they were adaptive. Delegate Kira, still without her biosuit, spoke up from her seat. The Calarian Defense Fleet has been using the same tactical formations for 3,000 years. We thought tradition meant strength, but maybe it just meant stagnation. The Drakmari delegate in his massive exoskeleton shifted uncomfortably. Our battle computers run simulations based on historical data. They calculate the most efficient way to achieve victory with minimal casualties to our forces. And what happens when the enemy doesn't follow historical patterns? Jake asked. What happens when they do something your computers never considered? The calculations become meaningless, the Drakmari admitted reluctantly. Lisa seized the opportunity. That's why human tactics seem so chaotic to you. We don't fight according to preset patterns. Every battle is different. Every situation requires new solutions. We adapt because we have to. Elder Koth looked around the chamber at his fellow delegates. When did we stop being warriors and become technicians? When did we start trusting machines more than our own judgment? The question hung in the air like a challenge. One by one, more delegates began to speak up, sharing their own doubts about their species' dependence on technology. A Halixian delegate, still wearing his biosuit, admitted that his people hadn't engaged in unenhanced combat for over 1,000 years. A representative from the Zephyrian collective revealed that their military academies now taught protocol management instead of tactical thinking. We've become so civilized that we've forgotten how to fight for what matters, said a delegate from the Outer Rim territories. We've made warfare so clean and predictable that we've lost the ability to defend ourselves against anyone willing to fight dirty. Jake walked closer to Zethmer's platform. The galaxy is changing, Speaker. New threats are emerging that don't care about your ancient protocols. The Kethvar were just the beginning. There are other enemies out there, and they're all studying your weaknesses. What are you proposing? Zethmer asked, his voice barely audible through his armor speakers. Partnership, Lisa said, stepping forward to stand beside Jake. Not human dominance or alien submission, but real cooperation. Humans can teach adaptability and creative thinking. Aliens can share their advanced technology and accumulated knowledge. Together, we can create something stronger than either. Side alone, the chamber erupted in discussion as delegates talked among themselves in dozens of languages. Some were excited by the possibility, others were worried about the implications. But for the first time since the trial began, they were talking with each other instead of at each other. Delegate Kira stood up again. I propose a motion to suspend the current trial and begin formal discussions about reforming Alliance military. Doctrine. Seconded, said Elder Koth immediately. Thirded, added the Drakmari delegate. his voice booming through his exoskeleton speakers. Zethmer watched as more and more delegates voiced their support for the motion. His crystal armor was cycling through colors again, but now it seemed more like uncertainty than anger. Finally, he made his decision. The crystal armor began to separate from his body, a complex process that took several minutes. As each piece came away, it revealed a being that looked surprisingly fragile. Zethmer's natural form was tall and graceful, with skin that had a subtle crystalline quality but was clearly organic. When the last piece of armor was removed, Zethmer stood before the assembly in simple robes. His natural voice was soft and musical, completely different from the mechanical tones of his armor speakers. "You were right, Admiral Morrison," he said, looking directly at Jake. "I have been hiding behind this armor for so long that I had forgotten what it felt like to be vulnerable, to be truly present in a moment without artificial protection." He turned to address the entire chamber. "The motion to suspend the trial and begin reform discussions is approved. Let us find a new way forward, one that honors both our technological achievements and our natural courage." 6 months later, Lisa Martinez stood on the bridge of the Alliance vessel Harmony, watching mixed human and alien crews working together during their first joint training exercise. The ship itself was a symbol of the new cooperation, combining human adaptability with alien technology. Jake Morrison had been promoted to Admiral of Integrated Combat Operations, working with alien military leaders to develop new tactics that emphasized flexibility over rigid protocol. Lisa had become his deputy, specializing in cross-species unit coordination. The training exercise was going well. Human soldiers were learning to work with alien technology while maintaining their natural adaptability. Alien forces were practicing improvisational tactics and learning to make decisions without computer assistance. "Status report," Lisa called out. Lieutenant Danny Kim, a human communications officer, responded first. "All units are maintaining formation, but Squad 7 just improvised a flanking maneuver that wasn't in the original plan." Delegate Kira, now serving as an alien military advisor, smiled. "Excellent. The Calarian units are learning to adapt their tactics in real time instead of following predetermined patterns." Lisa nodded with satisfaction. The new integrated approach was working better than anyone had hoped. Human creativity combined with alien precision was proving to be devastatingly effective. "Admiral Morrison to the bridge," came Jake's voice over the comm system. When Jake arrived, he was accompanied by Zethmer, who now served as the Alliance's chief military coordinator. The former council speaker had adapted well to working without his crystal armor, though he still wore a simplified version during combat operations. "The war games are complete," Jake announced. "Our mixed units achieved objectives 40% faster than traditional Alliance forces and 60% faster than human-only units." Zethmer added, "The combination of human adaptability and alien technology has created tactical possibilities that neither side could achieve alone. We are not just stronger together, we are fundamentally different together." Lisa looked out at the stars beyond the ship's viewport. The galaxy was still dangerous, and new threats would always emerge. But for the first time in her career, she felt truly confident about the future. "The enemy won't know what hit them," she said with a smile. "More importantly," Jake replied, "they won't be able to predict what we'll do next. And that's the greatest advantage any military force can have." The new Alliance had learned that true strength came not from hiding behind armor, but from the courage to stand vulnerable before the universe and say, "This is who we are, this is what we fight for, and we will not yield."